one glove, one dance move, one dress that fit too well. That's all it took for Hollywood to brand a woman vulgar and try to erase her from the screen forever. For nearly a century, studios, senators, and church groups have used that single word as a weapon against actresses who dared to move, speak, or dress differently than the era allowed. Some of these women were nearly banned outright. Others sparked actual Senate hearings. A few turned their scandal into an empire. Number 1. The secret weapon nobody saw coming, Hedy Lamarr. Picture this. European censors and even U.S. customs officials nearly seized the film as obscene material before its star ever set foot in America. That's the position Hedy Lamarr found herself in after a 1933 film featured a nude swimming scene and an implied moment of intimacy. Vatican newspapers publicly condemned it. By the time MGM brought her to Hollywood, studio chief Louis B. Mayer was already doing damage control, warning gossip columnists that she'd come from a naughty European picture, but promising audiences, "Here, she will be a lady." It didn't fully work. Lamarr's smoldering screen presence in later films like Samson and Delilah kept the "forbidden" label attached to her name for years. But here's what almost nobody knew at the time. While columnists hounded her with questions about romance, Lamarr was spending her off hours co-developing a frequency-hopping communication technology during World War II, a concept that today underpins Bluetooth and Wi-Fi. The woman the press reduced to a pretty, improper face was quietly inventing the future. She once joked that any girl could be glamorous. All she had to do was stand still and look unremarkable. The irony is that Lamarr was never still and never unremarkable. She was arguably one of the sharpest minds Hollywood ever sidelined in favor of a scandal headline. And if you think a genius got dismissed as vulgar, wait until you hear about the actress who turned a single dance move into a national controversy, using nothing but one glove. Number 2. Rita Hayworth. The glove heard around the world. In 1946, Rita Hayworth performed a dance number that became instant Hollywood legend, an instant Hollywood controversy. The scene, from Gilda, involved her removing exactly one glove. That's it. No more. But critics at the time treated it as a full striptease by implication, and parent groups lobbied to have it cut entirely. Life magazine celebrated the moment as iconic. Conservative groups branded it vulgar eroticism. It wasn't the first time her image caused a stir. Wartime pin-up photos of Hayworth in a black lace negligee were plastered across military barracks worldwide, so widespread that at least one military chaplain complained the imagery was raising more than morale. What almost nobody knew was how mismatched this reputation was with the woman underneath it. Born Margarita Cancino, she was shy, bookish, and famously practiced dance steps until her shoes wore through. She reportedly resented the love goddess image built around her, admitting that men fell for the character but woke up with someone entirely different. Producers kept building roles around the same slow-burn sensuality, cementing a reputation she never fully chose for herself. Her later years, marked by illness and difficult marriages, softened public judgment. But that single glove remains one of the clearest examples in film history of how little it actually took to get a woman branded indecent. Number 3. Marilyn Monroe. The dress that started a war. Marilyn Monroe is remembered today as the ultimate glamour icon. But behind that soft focus image was a constant battle over what she was allowed to wear, say, and do on camera. In 1951, she appeared in a gold lame gown so tight she could barely sit down. A columnist publicly called her cheap, and the label followed her for years. Her response? She posed for photos in a plain potato sack, essentially daring critics to call that indecent too. But the controversy didn't stop there. Her role as an adulterous wife in Niagara featured a walking scene filmed in slow motion that review boards nearly cut entirely, calling the movement itself immoral. Later, her costumes in Some Like It Hot, beaded gowns that appeared painted onto her body, triggered fresh protests from decency groups. What critics rarely acknowledged was the other side of Monroe, a woman who read classical literature, attended serious acting workshops, and was famously uncomfortable with this sex symbol identity forced onto her. She once said she hated becoming a thing rather than a person. That tension, between the image Hollywood profited from and the person underneath, defines her legacy just as much as any gown ever did. Now imagine facing that same backlash decades later, except this time it's a Senate hearing room, and the footage being played isn't from a studio film at all. Number 4. Betty Page. When the Senate watched her films. Betty Page is remembered today as a pin-up icon in a leopard print bikini. But her most notorious work wasn't glamour photography at all. It was a series of low-budget short films featuring playful bondage themes. In 1957, excerpts from that footage were actually played during a U.S. Senate obscenity hearing. Lawmakers reacted with outrage. The press called it filth corrupting American youth. Here's the twist almost nobody expects: Page had simply answered a casting call. To her, it was just another modeling job, treated with the same professionalism as any other shoot. Off camera, she volunteered at her church and baked for her neighbors, a contradiction that thoroughly confused the moral crusaders trying to paint her as a corrupting influence. After she stepped away from modeling, Page largely vanished from public life, spending years in religious study and dealing with mental health struggles largely out of the spotlight. She was nearly forgotten by the mainstream until a wave of nostalgia in the 1990s turned her into a full-blown cultural icon, her image now printed on coffee mugs and fashion runways rather than debated on the Senate floor. Her story is maybe the clearest proof that Vulgar was never really about the content. It was about who got to decide what counted as scandalous. But if you think government hearings were rare, wait until you hear about the actress whose film got condemned by name in international headlines, and who responded with just 4 words. Number 5. Brigitte Bardot. I have nothing to hide. When Brigitte Bardot danced barefoot across the screen in And God Created Woman in 1956, it triggered an international reaction few films have matched. The Catholic Legion of Decency formally condemned it. Multiple American mayors threatened to ban it from their cities. Entertainment press repeatedly used the word vulgar to describe both the film and its star. Bardot's response became almost as famous as the film itself. Asked to explain herself, she simply said she was immaculate and had nothing to hide. Off-screen, she was sunbathing topless long before that was culturally normalized, drawing swarms of paparazzi desperate for another, indecent, photograph. Her openness about relationships, marriages, and affairs clashed hard with 1950s expectations of how a woman should behave in public. But there was real substance behind the headlines. Her performance in Contempt years later showed genuine emotional depth in a story about a marriage falling apart. And as the 1970s arrived, Bardot walked away from acting almost entirely, redirecting that same fearless, headline-grabbing energy into animal rights activism, a cause she's remained fiercely committed to for decades. The traits that got her branded vulgar, boldness, refusal to apologize, total sincerity, never actually went away. She just pointed them somewhere else entirely. Next, an actress whose leg-crossing scene became so infamous that theaters slapped adults only signs onto a film that already had an R rating. Number 6. Jean Harlow. The Girl Who Made Sin Shimmer. Decades before Marilyn Monroe's iconic white dress, Jean Harlow was already reshaping what a scandalous leading lady looked like. MGM bleached her hair to a near-blinding platinum shade and dressed her in silk slips for films like Red-Headed Woman. But it wasn't just her look that unsettled critics, it was her mouth. Harlow used blunt, working-class slang on screen that reviewers openly said belonged on a loading dock, not in a movie theater. Newsweek famously dubbed her the girl who made sin shimmer. In Red-Headed Woman specifically, she played a secretary who marries her boss, physically confronts his wife, and pursues nearly everyone else in his orbit, provocative enough that state censors clip scenes outright. Audiences lined up anyway. When a columnist asked how she felt about being called vulgar, Harlow reportedly laughed it off, noting she'd been called far worse. Off-screen, her nightlife and backless gowns fed gossip columns relentlessly. But co-stars consistently described her as warm and well-mannered between takes, a contradiction the public found irresistible. A bad girl, with impeccable manners. Harlow's sudden death at 26 froze her image permanently in that unresolved tension. Dangerous on screen, gracious off it, a mystery the industry never really let her clarify. But even Harlow owes something to a woman from the silent era who invented this entire archetype before movies even had sound. Number 7. Theda Bara, the woman who invented the vamp. Rewind to 1915, when films had no sound at all, but headlines still found plenty to shout about. Theodosia Goodman, rebranded by studios as Theda Bara, became the original screen temptress. Publicists even claimed her stage name was an anagram related to death itself, a pure marketing myth designed to add mystique. In her breakout film, A Fool There Was, she lounges seductively while luring a married man toward ruin, delivering the now iconic intertitle line, "Kiss me, my fool." Her promotional posters draped her in snakeskin and tiger pelts. Church bulletins denounced the imagery as outright satanic. Off camera, by all accounts, she was quiet and soft-spoken, but Fox Studios staged elaborate photo shoots with occult props specifically to keep the dangerous myth alive. Some small-town theater owners refused to book her films at all, fearing backlash from local churches, yet trainloads of fans showed up regardless. Only a handful of her films survive today, but her core aesthetic, dark, smoky eyes, bare arms, deliberate danger, permanently entered the language. The word vamp exists because of her. Every femme fatale who came after, knowingly or not, borrowed from a formula Theda Bara invented before anyone could even hear her speak. Which brings us to the woman who took that same danger and made it explicitly, defiantly gender-bending, kissing a woman on screen in 1930 and daring censors to do something about it. Number 8. Marlene Dietrich, the actress who broke gender rules on camera. Marlene Dietrich arrived in Hollywood already refusing to follow the rules, trailing tuxedos, top hats, and a reputation for doing exactly what she wanted. In the 1930 film Morocco, she kisses another woman directly on the lips before tipping her hat to a room full of stunned men, a scene multiple state censor boards tried, and failed, to cut entirely. Review boards labeled her outright immoral. Newspapers used vulgar specifically to describe her gender-bending wardrobe choices. Dietrich's response was characteristically blunt. She simply said clothes had no gender. Off camera, she hosted legendary dinner parties mixing high culture with working-class charm, caviar served beside sausages, opera discussed beside sailors' songs. During World War II, she went further than almost any star of her era, appearing at the front lines to sing for Allied troops, still dressed in her signature suits. To moralists back home, she remained indecent. To soldiers in freezing foxholes, she represented something closer to courage. Dietrich effectively outlasted the vulgar label entirely by folding every accusation directly into her art, using a sharp grin and a tailored suit to quietly dismantle the entire premise of the criticism. And finally, the woman who started this whole pattern decades before any of them, the actress whose real name was legally changed after censors decided her jokes alone were too dangerous for the public. Number 9. Mae West, the original scandal queen. Mae West. Before any of the actresses on this list, there was Mae West, the woman who essentially forced Hollywood to invent its own censorship rules specifically because of her. In the early 1930s, when most leading ladies spoke politely and dressed modestly, West wrote her own stage play and later starred in films wearing tight satin dresses, delivering lines in a slow, deliberately teasing voice loaded with double meanings. Parent-teacher organizations and church leaders warned publicly that her jokes would corrupt public morals. Her films were directly cited as evidence when the newly formed production code was drafted to enforce stricter content rules across the entire industry. A Boston radio station went so far as to pull one of her comedy sketches for sounding too suggestive. Most performers facing that level of backlash would have toned things down. West did the opposite. She leaned all the way into the controversy, famously joking that censorship had actually made her rich, since every new complaint just drove more curious ticket buyers to theaters. That fearless refusal to back down became her trademark. But it also permanently locked her into history as the actress most responsible for an entire era's definition of vulgar, a label she wore, quite deliberately, like a crown. Which just goes to show, nearly every woman on this list wasn't punished for crossing a line. She was punished for deciding where the line actually was, and daring everyone else to argue with her.